one thing to keep in mind now is keep these 4 things, which we kind of just talked about, in mind as we talk about these particular examples. We can talk about the speed in which gathering and exchange has changed based on these things, and the amounts change, the duration it gets stored, the types of data, etc. So, what is this? Shout it out. It's a cookie, yeah. It is a cookie, and they taste good.
So it was an art palette.
Well, it kind of looks like an art palette, although if you have paint in the middle, you get paint all over your hands. What is a cookie in the sense of not the Cookie Monster eats them, but the internet has them? What is a cookie?
It's a collection of previous data or browsing data or favorites or
basically
storage of like information about websites visited or what you did on the website.
Yeah, think of it this way: is what does a cookie do when you pick it up and run across the room with it? Yeah, it leaves little trails of crumbs. So every time you go to a website, you leave behind little crumbs. And that information from that website, all those little crumbs that get left every time you go to that website is, information. So when you go to a website, generally, if you go to a website, there's very often at the bottom, there's a little message. And what does the little message say? Yeah, we use cookies. Are you okay with that? Some thing like that. And what does this button say? Accept. And if you hit accept, you get to use their website normally. If you don't hit it, what happens? Or if there's a decline option, which there almost never is, what happens if you hit decline?
Direct you back to
yeah, you're not allowed to, either you're not allowed to go there, or you're not allowed to get certain aspects of their website. So very often, it'll just mean like you get like a very stripped down version, or more often, you're just not allowed on. So what sort of information does the cookie have? Just that you were there is generally the main gist of it. It's just a way that monitors that you were on the website. And this information they're stored by multiple people or multiple companies. One is your browser. Your browser is going to store all the information of what web pages you've been to. And also going to store it is the website you go to itself is going to gather what IP address was there, etc. So it's basically in the same way that if you walk into a room and you touch everything, your fingerprints are now all over it. Imagine that automatically, as soon as instead of just touching a table where someone would have to come on and dust and like collect your fingerprints, every surface just automatically registered that you were there, and that's what cookies are. They just gather that your IP address was there. So, the fact that cookies are there and this information is automatically gathered and stored because all this information, Google has a database on every web page you visited. What sorts of information can Google now get? Like on its own, what web pages you went to aren't all that useful. But how can that information be used to affect your other types of privacy or also just gather information which could then be useful about you? So what's something that a cookie allows Google to learn about you which couldn't have been learned before cookies in the internet? All right, let's go.
Like if you go on a website that you have to use a username or email.
Yeah, so one thing is, depending on what cookies are gathered and all, there is a possibility that your username and email information can get stolen. Now, it's generally, that's not something which most websites are going to do. It's much more something just like what IP address. So there's also the added risk that something on the website is going to steal any sort of personal information from you. But even if it's just not doing that, like keep it at a bare bones level, we've already talked about one of these. What is something which a lot of us do online? We shop. We shop online. There is so much information about you that can be gathered just by seeing what you shop for. So, how many of you do clothing shopping online? I do. Now, let's go back 25 years ago. Think about all the information now that you that is on the internet, collected in cookies, based on what you look at, searching. Now imagine imagine that internet doesn't exist yet, and I want to know everything about your clothing shopping habits. You decide, because there's no online stores, you're going to go shopping one Saturday. And I decide I want to know what you're shopping for. What do I have to do? Describe my day.
You shopping with me?
Yeah, I literally go, hey, can I come along with you? Or if you say no, I literally just, sneak behind you the entire day. And I literally just watch you. That is now what Google is doing without anybody actually. Think about how much work it would have taken 25 years ago to know what it was you were shopping for. And now that information is automatically tracked and stored in multiple places. So, for instance, I know if I'm following you around, I now can know by watching you what colors you prefer, what sorts of outfits you prefer. Google does this automatically. What sorts of colors you like, you can probably tell what sort of colors you like just by looking at someone's shopping browser history. Here's another thing. 25 years ago, there was always a paper trail of what you ended up purchasing, provided you had the receipt. But what's the major difference between a receipt and the information stored in cookies? Either one of you, fire away.
It doesn't like get lost. It's like
Yeah,
it's
so
not a physical thing.
So one major difference is you can't, unless Google's servers crash, that information isn't going anywhere. And this is another major difference. This is something we were talking about, the duration of storage. If I wanted to collect everybody in this room's data or shopping habits over an entire course of a year, what would I need to do if this was the year 1960? Other than one, hire a small army of people to follow each one of you around so I can make sure you were always being watched. What would I have to do once I started collecting all that information? Yeah, I'd store it, and how would I store it? Yeah, in a paper or file. Like, I would need to get a storage unit to put files in and keep them somewhere. Nowadays, Google literally can store, you can now store more on like something this big than you can store in like this entire room with paper, easily. The amount of information you can store on one tiny little memory stick is more than you can probably store almost as much on one memory stick as like entire rows down in the library, if not more. Like, there's an argument to be made that on one external hard drive you could fit a PDF of every single book that's currently in the John Jay Library on something this big. Think about just like the scale of information that can be stored. So it's not just that I can get it. Once I have it, I can keep it, and I can keep it for a really long time. There's no need for me, if I'm Google, to throw away any information about you. I can keep it forever because storage isn't a problem. If I'm keeping things in paper, space costs money, especially in New York City. There's a reason why rents are so high. Space is a commodity, which is not limitless. But if you can store in tiny little chips the amount of information that used to take rooms, information is a lot easier to keep around. So that's another thing, is it lasts so much longer, and you can keep it and store it, and you don't have to worry about it being lost. What's another one? What are some things which cookies can get which no army of people following you around would necessarily be able to find out? If all I have access to are your receipts of what you bought, what don't I know, which cookies might? So one is card number, but also, it's not just that I want to know what you bought. If I really want to know what your shopping habits are, I don't just want to know what you actually bought. What do I also want to know? Pardon?
How you paid?
How you paid? So yeah, that's another thing, but also
What you almost bought?
what you almost bought. Cookies can tell you what somebody almost bought but decided not to. I cannot, without reading your mind, know that. How can a cookie tell?
Your browser history.
Yeah, your browser history. You go on Amazon, you don't buy every single thing. But you're going to look at a lot of things and be like, maybe I want this one, maybe I want that one. Also, if you spend 3 hours looking at things, you probably really, really want that, something of that type. And if I'm an advertiser, I'm going to know that and go, oh, this person's really in the market for an electric toothbrush. I make electric toothbrushes, that's the person I want to try to sell it to. They're still making up their mind. If I just see that if I just see your receipt for a trip to the pharmacy, I'm not gonna know you almost bought an electric toothbrush. All I will know is after the fact you did buy it. But with cookies, I can know all the things you even looked at. Like, I would literally, to get that sort of information before, I would have had to literally, one, get inside your head, and two, follow what your eyes were looking at any given time. Now, a cookie has all the things you almost bought. And so it's not just what you did buy, where I now know that you like red clothes. I also know, even though you didn't buy any blue clothes on this particular occasion, you're always considering blue clothes, so therefore that's a pretty good bet too. Or you might not have bought anything from Banana Republic today, or The Gap today, or Old Navy today, but you looked at all of them, so I know that if I'm that company, you're somebody who might shop at me. But if I know that you've never once in your life looked at, I don't know, Versace, then I know if I'm Versace, I'm not advertising to you. So that's the difference with cookies. It's not just what you do, it's what you almost do and what you think about doing. And all that information is stored in one place, collected in one company. Why is this worrying? Or why is this a major change in privacy? What can this company now do along with just collect that?
They can, you go.
Either one of you. Free.
They can sell that information to
Yes,
some
here's
other
the thing.
company.
Your shopping history is worth money. You are a commodity because what you've done and almost done and what you could do is incredibly valuable to people because it's so much data, and the best way to influence people's decisions is know how to influence them, and the best way to know how to influence them is just learn about them. And so just the very fact that when you go on the internet, you produce huge amounts of data. So why is Google free? Why is it free for you to use Google? How do they make money? What is the commodity?
Your data.
Your data. You are the thing being farmed. You are their way of making money. It is not free to use Google. You just pay in information about yourself. Because people are willing to, Google does not take that information straightforwardly and sell it. Instead, they run information, they find patterns in that data and then sell those patterns to other people. So if they find across a huge population that suddenly there's a major skyrocketing within New York City of people searching Popeye's chicken sandwiches, that information is very useful to Popeyes, and they can sell that information to Popeyes, who'd be willing to know, not only that, if you were Popeyes and this was an actual thing, they ran out of chicken sandwiches. If you were the person in charge of Popeyes New York City, and you knew that you only had 100,000 more sandwiches to sell, what sort of information would be very useful to you? How many people are coming? Or, so here's another thing. Say you run out of chicken sandwiches, and you know that you're about to get a new shipment in, and you're Popeyes, and what's your goal as Popeyes?
To make the most.
To make the most money possible. And you know you're about to get more sandwiches in. What's a question you're going to ask yourself right at the start?
Where are they buying the most?
Where are people buying the most Popeyes sandwiches? And this is not something you can necessarily know, except one way you could find this out: who's Google searching it the most? Who's posting the most photos with their Popeyes chicken sandwiches? If Google has this information and can sell it to Popeyes, Popeyes can now use this information and to decide where, when they get enough chicken sandwiches, they should start putting them in first. Because you don't want any time with no chicken sandwiches. And if you find out, say, Brooklyn eats 3 times as many chicken sandwiches as Queens, then any chicken sandwiches you get, you're going to want to first go to the Popeyes in Brooklyn. And so that's how this information is useful to companies and why you are able to use Google for free, because you are paying them in that data.
I think it also has to do mostly with the browsing history part though, and not necessarily with the actual decision that you make, but the potential decision. That's what makes it such a hot commodity.
Absolutely. It's because the sheer amount, you don't ever actually have to have bought a chicken sandwich. The very fact that you looked at it shows some degree of interest in it. And the very fact that you looked at it and had some degree of interest shows you're a potential customer for the Popeyes chicken sandwich. And in that way, the browser history itself is worth so much money. It's not what you actually bought, it's the very fact that you thought about it and all the information stored. And also things along the line of where you purchased it from. It's not just, if you were doing your searching on your phone, they not only know what you were looking at and when you were looking at it, but where you were looking at it. And they might find that when you're at school in a certain class, you're far more likely to look up video games to buy on Steam than if you're in a different class. And so you might start getting advertisements only when you're a very particular location. And so instead of having to spend money, so if you're a company looking to advertise and you pay Google the right to advertise your stuff, you can pay less money if you are having this Google display your ads for only a short period of time. And you want to find out what are the best times. Well, you find out that people, like if you're a weight loss company, say a company who specializes in helping people lose weight, there are going to be certain times of year that you're going to want to advertise and other times of year that you're not as much going to want to advertise. So if you're spending, say you have $100,000 to spend, it's not going to cover the whole year, and you run a weight loss company, when's probably going to be the best time to spend that advertising money? Spring is very often, and New Year. Spring because people want to look good when they go to the beach, and New Year's because people just gained a lot of weight eating cookies for all of the holidays and now feel bad about it. And so if you're a gym, there's a reason why gyms advertise really hard the final week of December and the first week of January, because that's the time people are most likely. Here's another thing that is found, which by looking at these sorts of data and collecting it, is people change their Facebook status relationship the most around certain times of year, most notably around holidays, right before you would have to go and see the other person's parents, and it leads to a lot of tension. And so if you're like OkCupid and you want to advertise, that data is really useful to you. And so that's the way that cookies are just fundamentally changing the amount and the ease with which these companies have, and why you are able to use Google for free, but are actually making Google millions and millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars. So,
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's so crazy, because Google is literally they have so much money, and nobody pays them, and like none of us, but we make them so much money, it's crazy.
yeah, we are literally think of it like they are the farmer and we are the sheep.
Yeah.
Only instead of them shearing us, well, they just shear off our information. And that's literally the Google business model. The business model is your information is a commodity.
So much money.
So much money. Here's the thing, is if you were to sell the amount, they've done calculations on this, and it's, your data that you create in a year is worth well over $1,000 of it. That's how much they make off of you, is well over 1,000, but you don't see any of it because in exchange you use their products. And that's a big ethical question, is the fact is you are making Google billions of dollars, or we as a commodity. You have to stop thinking that you are you are the commodity, you are the thing being sold. You aren't seeing a cent of it, and that is something you should, at the very least, ask yourself, am I okay with this? Does the fact that I get to use Google and Gmail for free offset the fact that they are making millions and billions of dollars off of me?
Say 50% of people got angry and were like, you know what, we're not okay with this. What could we even do?
And here's the big thing, and this is a major issue of it, which is, what can you do? Because the fact is, imagine you got so mad at Google that you just refused to use them anymore.
Who's losing?
Yeah, exactly. There's this thing in which Google has become so important to the way we run that if you were to just stop using Google, it's unclear how you would be able to compete with it would require everyone to stop using Google all at once. And it's very unlikely that that can happen because it's so integrated into our society that the question of so everyone stops using Google.
Google when? When do we stop?
Yeah. Or another issue is, so you cannot use their services if you do this. Or another thing is, think about how much harder your life would be if you boycotted Google. If you boycotted Google, you'd literally be the one person who still goes on MapQuest, prints things out, or the one person who goes to the gas station and literally pulls out a map to go meet your friends at the bar. it's just not really practical, which is a tough thing because we are so reliant on it, and yet at the same time, there's a lot of things where you have to go like, oh, what can I do about it?
You get lost every day.
Yeah, you get lost all the time. I was one of the last people I knew to get a smartphone. I was still rocking the flip phone, and I still miss it every day. I loved you, flip phone. But I will say, as like a matter of fact, it made my life significantly harder not being able. So like people assume everyone else has a smartphone. So if you email me 5 minutes before class to say you're going to be late, you have a reasonable expectation that I will get that email and mark down that you're going to be excused. If I have a dumb phone, then I can't do that. And I can't know that you emailed me. Or say somebody offers you a job and they're like, it's time sensitive, and you don't have a smartphone, the odds of you getting that job, you have to be lucky enough to be next to your computer at the time they email. And the reason why they say it's time sensitive, you have a half an hour, is because they assume you will get that email quickly. And so just, yeah, if you want to boycott this stuff, it seems, at this point, it's basically impossible. And yet there's also this big question of like, oh, wow. And another big issue is, how many people know what cookies are if you're talking about the general population? If you ask your grandma, she says, yeah, I'm making chocolate chips today. And the fact is that most people don't, it's just like Google is so complicated that they don't understand this. So even if you could get, imagine that you can imagine what could be done, it's hard to even get to the point where you get enough people understanding the problem to even get behind it. Because the ways in which the average person doesn't feel that they're losing money that they should be owed when Google is mining their data. But they are, but they can't even comprehend how enough to get pissed about it, or at least question it.
I think a good example of how ignorant people are to what's going on is I'm pretty sure most of us have Instagram. We've seen that post that was like, oh, Instagram is like getting removed tomorrow. If you share this, all of your posts will say. Like all of those posts that you see on Facebook that people just repost as a status, thinking that it's going to make a difference, protect their data.
Yeah.
It just goes to show how ignorant people are towards what's
Yeah,
going on.
and there's just and to the point that very often, the news stories you see, you have to have a certain level of understanding to even understand what is happening, never mind form an opinion about it. I'm at the low end. As I've said, my tech knowledge is there, but I'm not a master coder, I'm none of this. So if I read a story about something, I can barely understand what's happening, never mind how I should feel about it. And I am at the higher end of knowledge on this stuff. So the number of people who can really understand this is so low. And very often the people who do understand it, who do they work for? Google, or the government, or somebody who doesn't necessarily want it to change.
I feel like it's not about ignorance, it's just too complex to understand for some.
Yeah, and that's what we mean. So we don't mean ignorant. So there are two different ways of using ignorant. One is a pejorative sort of you're a stupid idiot sense. And the other is just you just don't, you happen not to know. And it's this sort of sense, which in this sort of case, it's not like your grandma is being an ignorant pig by not knowing something like that. It's just she doesn't happen to have the expertise needed, because to understand what's going on, you have to go to college with computers. Never mind, if you didn't grow up with a computer, it's very hard to even understand. My dad to this day does not understand that the nature of a file system. That if you rename a file in one place, it's the same exact process on another case. If you rename your folder